Okay, just a quick question, a little bit of audience interaction, because this is going to be this is about the only bit of audience interaction I can afford given the time budget. Who would class themselves as systems thinker in the room? Okay, reasonable number of you. Shout out which flavour of systems thinking, because there's about as many as there are flavours of Agile.
Soft systems methodology.
Soft systems. Viable system model. Anybody else? Okay, cool. There's lots and lots of others. Okay, the reason why I asked the systems thinking question is the quote at the bottom. You'll recognise it from The Matrix, those of you that are science fiction geeks like me. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. And that's what system thinking is like. The guy that invented or brought it down, created the viable systems model, a guy called Stafford Beer. I read his obituary this week, and you'll realise why in a minute, from 2002. And the obituary basically said he changed the way people think. And that's what this is about. So it's a little bit of a health warning. Once you get into systems thinking, and particularly viable systems, you will not think the same again. All right, just a little bit of health warning. So if you want to take the blue pill, that's fine. Believe whatever you want to believe. I'm hoping that you want to take the red pill and come with me and the other systems thinkers on a bit of a journey. This is La Jolla Shores in San Diego. The balcony I took this photograph from was where suddenly two threads of my life finally came together. The systems thinking thread. I was a systems thinker back in the 1990s, but I could never actually make systems thinking work for me. I could never make systems thinking working for the people that I wanted it to work for. Couldn't quite work out how to actually implement it, and when push comes to shove, I'm an implementer. You know, I like to create things, I like to create software and help other people create software. But through my work with the Government Digital Service and in Government Digital particularly, after working in investment banking, I could start seeing patterns that felt a little bit systems-ish. And suddenly, having taken the whole of August off, and it took me taking the whole of August off, they finally started coming together. So this is going to be a bit rough and ready. It is also going to be a bit of a scamper through, because I've only got 20 minutes, but stay with me. We're going to run around one of the round tables tomorrow. We can go into it in a bit more detail. Have I got my clicker? I haven't got the clicker. Where'd the clicker go? Where'd the clicker go? We'll find my clicker. Okay. That's it. Sorry? Thank you very much.
You're on your next slide.
Thank you very much. Okay, so my basic thesis is the old organisational model is broken because it generates the wrong behaviour, it can't cope with complexity, and it reasserts itself. Those two things you've heard time and time again today, but I am going to just touch on those again. The reassert itself one's a little bit more pernicious, but you'll see what I'll get onto in a moment. My basic thesis is we need a different model. Okay? So, structured behaviour. David and I had a quick conversation about this when we were miking up, and Paul talked about Conways law this morning, which is a specific instance of structured bias behaviour. People can only behave constrained by their organisational structure. Okay? Let me just talk a little bit more about that. So this is your classic organisation. Absolutely classic organisation. Number of silos, board at the top. What sort of behaviour do you think it generates? Go on, shout them out. Silos. But what behaviour? How are people behaving there? Compliance.
Local optimization.
Optimization. Look at them, they're all looking up. Blinkered. They're looking up, they're blinkered in their silos. Okay, this is all the polite behaviour we're seeing that's just driven by the structure. We talked about command and control. There's lots of talk about command and control going on today. Okay, what sort of behaviour does command and control generate? Bullying, nasty stuff, you know, sexism, all of the other isms, all of those sorts of things. Okay, because ultimately there's somebody at the top that thinks they're God or have been told that they're God, and handing down tablets of stone. And it is typically a bloke, unfortunately. And actually, we were talking earlier about good managers and your best manager. My best managers are a guy called John Thompson, who I worked for the National Bank of New Zealand, and a guy called Jim McManus, who I worked with at ICL. They were brilliant people. All of that stuff we were talking about, they were supportive, all those sorts of things. They were brilliant. They both left their organisations because they couldn't behave the way they wanted to behave, because the organisation just wouldn't let them behave because of being driven by the targets, whatever else it may happen to be. How many really bad people have you run into in management? I won't name names, but there's one or two I found in Vodafone. And actually, they were really quite nice people when you got them aside and had a beer with them. But in their context, they were just horrible people to work for. So they're all looking upwards, but of course the board is now turning around and sort of saying, let's focus on the customer. And of course they're not focusing on the customer, they're focused on the shareholders. I'll come back to that point a bit later. Same in the public sector. This is a generic model of how the criminal justice system works in all Commonwealth countries. They're all the same. You've got a bunch of silos, you've got the police handing over to the prosecution, handing over to the courts, handing on to prison and probation, and of course it's all funded by the Treasury, all reporting to different hierarchies. Of course, you end up with people slipping through the cracks. Now, this is true in all hierarchical organisations. I pick on this one because it shows the extreme, because you're dealing with vulnerable individuals, both as witnesses and victims, and often as suspects and criminals. They're vulnerable individuals. So the human cost of people falling between the cracks is very, very real. 2 women a week get killed by their partners or ex-partners. And in most of those cases, there's a history of domestic violence beforehand. So it isn't really surprising that when these vulnerable people are being passed from one organisation to another, the prosecution might fall between the cracks. If you could fix this, and the UK government is trying to fix it and is being quite successful in the delivery of this new system, if you can fix this, you stop people dying. That's the real cost of the existing hierarchical structures. Viable. We talk about viable an awful lot, don't we? Well, we don't actually. We talk about minimum viable, with the emphasis on the minimum. And that's good. Minimum's good because it forces us to prioritise. But viable's as important, if not more so, because we're talking about being able to maintain a separate existence. Now, the existing organisational structure might be justifiable if it provided long-term security, long-term employment, long-term self-actualisation for the masses, even if one or two got hurt along the way. But it doesn't. As Fortune 500, between 1955 and 2016, there are only 60 companies that exist that exist today that were on the first list. So they're not viable. The average lifespan of a company has gone from 80 years down to 10 years in the same time frame. And that's true whether you're a Fortune 500 company or a mom and pop shop or a small to medium enterprise. There's some interesting research around that, but I don't have time to delve around in that. And why do organisations fail? This is the classic one. This is the one we know about because we're into digital change. We're into digital stuff. Failure to adapt to technological change. The obvious examples, Kodak Eastman. Slow down, Jeremy. They were in the Fortune 500. They invented digital photography. They got some of the patents, or had some of the patents before they had to sell them off. The reason I put MySpace up there is actually the digital world's just the same. MySpace exploded, however many years ago it was. Now, ICL, my old company, they were brilliant at technology. They had some of the world's best products in the mid-90s, but they couldn't generate enough profit to actually realise the potential of them. They've since been absorbed into Fujitsu, which has its own problems. And then you have failures of ethos and values. Who remembers Enron? Who were their auditors? Arthur Andersen, the spawners of Accenture. Enron thought it was a really good idea to account for stuff off balance sheet. Fraud, basically. And a lot of people went to jail as a result of it. Bell Pottinger, this is a sort of a very British example, but very current one. Bell Pottinger, PR firm, thought it was a really good idea to run a racist PR campaign in South Africa. All of their other customers deserted them when it all came out. They thought they could get away with it. Failure of ethos and values. No transformation without structural change. Boy, do we know this one, guys. Everybody, you know this one, don't you? Focus on the customer. So we've been trying to focus on the customer for how long? Mid-90s. Mid-90s, we're talking about business process re-engineering. We then went on to talk about Lean Six Sigma, and we've had lots of goes at this, haven't we? How many of them have actually succeeded in changing the organisation? You can shout out if you like, but I haven't seen one. What's actually happened, of course, is we've automated the handoffs. We made the handoffs more effective, and then completely forgotten the customer. Hiding away behind the finance silo. Sorry, Steve. Any other accountants in the room? I just happened to randomly put him in finance. It could be just about anywhere else. If you're contacting a big telecoms company, you really could be lost just about anywhere. Okay? Now, we're not immune from this in the Agile movement. We're just not immune from it. At our best, we do this quite well. We really do this quite well. We pull together a multifunctional, disciplined, productive Agile team. We get our colleagues in sales and marketing, or the front office, wherever it may happen to be, our colleagues in operations, and we go off and create a really good thing, whatever that thing is. Digital service there's some really great things being done by government digital services and stuff. And I've seen this with three of my own clients, and I've seen this with three of my previous clients, and 5 of other people's just in the last 6-12 months. What's happened? The initiative goes away, the key people move on, of course you end up back in the IT silo, and you've got to go through the whole thing over and over again, which is great for us consultants, because we get to do the same shit all over again, and charge people for it, twice, 3 times. I don't want to do that anymore. I really, really, really don't want to do that anymore. So the old model is broken, I think you'll agree. Generates the wrong behaviour. I've said all this before. We need a different model. We're about to take the red pill here, okay? There is a different model. It's called the viable systems model. It was mentioned earlier on. And Stafford Beer, who created it in the 1970s, was an utter genius. Unfortunately, he was about 50 years ahead of his time. Okay? We need a more humane model. He's got one. It's derived from the human nervous system, the most viable organism on the planet, except possibly cockroaches. But let's not go there. All right? It's also derived from complexity mathematics, and we need to be able to manage complexity much better than we have. Okay? So it's got the right roots, and at the core of it are a whole bunch of concepts we now call Agile, things like empowerment, focus on value, particularly management of feedback, based on something called Ashby's law. Only variety can absorb a variety, but that's starting to really go into red pill territory. Once you start getting there, it all gets a bit freaky. Okay, but my key point here, and this is the point I really want to land with you, as an Agile movement, we've got most of the components here. I'm going to build up a viable systems model with the components we already have. All right, so we've got what in VSM terms we call System 1 operations. We've got it in terms of delivering a digital service. Okay? We put together a multidisciplinary team, we focus on the customer, and we deliver a great bit of tech, and that tech we get some feedback on every couple of weeks. It'd be great to get it daily, but a couple of weeks would be good, be a bloody sight better than we do most of the time. All right? And we work with our operations colleagues to incorporate non-digital elements of it. And this example is assisted digital from the digital service standard, but in private sector you'd be talking about some sort of logistics operation. Let's deliver a book, whatever it may happen to be, deliver a takeaway. And wouldn't it be great if we had our finance colleagues alongside us? Wouldn't it be great? And in a startup, when we talk about lean startup, you would have your finance colleagues alongside you. Now, there's an argument to say that this is a viable system. There is an argument to say that, but actually, in reality, most of the time, we're actually looking for some kind of scaling. For resilience purposes, and certainly for the purposes of when we're actually looking at a generic model for large and small organisations, look, you need to think about the multiple, because if you can do 2, you can do 10, you can do 100. Okay? So we've got a couple here. We're doing groceries, we'll do some film streaming, slightly different, all the rest of it. As soon as you get 2, you're going to end up with some sort of coordination problem. Now, the interesting thing here is we know how to do coordination. We're actually very, very good at it, because what happens is that these two digital services end up competing for money, end up competing for end up competing for key people, and we know how to coordinate that. It's called prioritisation. We're good at prioritisation. We've got Moscow, we've got all kinds of other great ways of prioritising stuff, much better than traditional methods of doing it. What we also have is the ability to set up communities of practice. The first thing you'd want to do here is to have some sort of consistency of user experience. So set up a community of practice, set up standards, set up ways of working, and we facilitate that. We can do that with the other tech communities, and we do. We're really good. You know, we're good at that. We know how to do this. Wouldn't it be great to do it with the finance department? Wouldn't that be really, really good? Let's encourage them to do that. Now, one of the signals that led me to that balcony on La Jolla Shores was that I put my hand up. In Agile Sphere, we nearly made this mistake. Actually, no, cancel that. We did make this mistake. We started putting in a finance silo. We started seeing the whole business. You know, we're only 100 people, basically doing tech consulting. So we saw the one business as just one whole. Where in fact, actually, each of our individual customers were looking for slightly different value propositions. And when we looked at it, they were quite big, different value propositions. So split it up, look at the individual value propositions, use the finance function to create standards, and encourage development of people. And then you can do the same sort of things, and I'd love to talk to you about what we might do with people, but I'm hoping that David and people like him, like Phil Parker and the Lightning Process, will actually be able to help us do that. So we've got coordination, we've got these services. They don't exist in a vacuum. They must have been created somewhere, chicken and egg. But what we want to make sure is that they're empowered. We know how to do empowerment. And we're quite happy to be accountable if we're empowered in the right way. We'll give you money, and you deliver some stuff for us. And we'll also do transparency. And we're really good at this stuff. We've got Beyond Budgeting to help us with empowerment and accountability on the right sort of feedback cycles. We know how to do transparency. We just do big walls. We do big diagrams. That's core to Agile. And we're starting to know how to do governance in an Agile way. It took a little bit of getting GDS there. Hugh and I were part of the team that did it. But they accepted that we needed some sort of governance. You can't exist in a vacuum. It doesn't matter whether you're public or private sector, you're spending other people's money. So we know how to do governance. We don't exist in a vacuum, as I've just said. We sit in a much larger environment, and we need to deal with the sort of situations that killed off Kodak. So there might be small changes in the environment, there might be some big changes in the environment. It's the big ones you've got to look out for. So we know how to look for big changes in the environment and then deal with them. I've used the digital service standards, which is based on lean startup. And if anybody's wanting to get new products and services out there, take that and work with it. I know a lot of private sector organisations are working with it. Focus on user needs, focus on what the real user needs are, understand them, and then proceed through the alpha beta and the alpha beta process. So that's an intelligence and innovation function, or system, in fact. Capability, prefer capability. So we've ended up with a bit of inside the organisation and now, which is the top bit, and that's got to work with outside the organisation in the future, because otherwise, if these two aren't connected, then you end up with a Kodak problem. You will be screwed by invention and innovation, and it doesn't matter whether you're public or you're private sector. It really doesn't. Okay? Now, we know how to facilitate that sort of conversation. We do. We're good facilitators. But we need to facilitate it within an identity, an ethos, a purpose. And this is where Bell Pottinger, I don't know, I wasn't there. But if I was, anyway, let me not risk any kind of lawsuit. I won't use an example here, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean. We need to do it within an ethos and a purpose where we'll say, we've got this new business idea, it'd be a really, really good idea. We can make lots of money at it. And we sort of said, you know what, that's not what we're about. We're really not about that, something like that. That's somebody else's opportunity, it's not ours. So this is the minimum viable organisation as far as I can see. You have services, you have coordination, you have a bit of governance, you have something that's sensing the future, intelligence and innovation, and you tie it together with ethos, ethics, and a purpose. Okay, like I say, really quick scamper through, but I'm hoping you'll see that it at least provokes your interest, that this would be a more human organisation. It'd be closer to an organism. The jellyfish example's not a bad one, except that the jellyfish does have structure. It does have a way of interacting, it does have a way of doing it. And we are just jellyfish with 5 billion years of research and development. Truly adaptive organisation, we can tricks, we can spin these things up, we can shut them down. Shutting them down is an interesting conversation. And like I said, I haven't really gone into it in any detail, but just take it from me, it's scalable. Now, if I'm right, and I may not be, I accept that I may not be, but if I'm right, this thing's big. It's bigger than me, it's bigger than Agile Sphere, it's probably bigger than most of us in the room. And it's sort of this kind of community. So this is okay, I've been thinking about it for a long time, but it's only really come together for me in the last month or so. So it's not full, it's not complete, it's not all there, okay? But the opportunity here is to actually go out there and give people a proper alternative to the old way of doing things. The old way of doing things is completely broken. Most people know it. That's our burning deck. We can now go out and sort of say, here is a sensible alternative. Take away the excuse not to transform, and people might start getting down to the real issues about why they're not transforming, which are likely to be personal, and David will help them with that. Thanks very much.